Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this first virtual event for the Forest Carbon Codefest. Can I get a thumbs up from a few people if you can hear me? Awesome. All righty. Yeah, well, I think we can get going today. We have about an hour and a half of content, and then we will send you on your way. So thank you so much, first off, for applying to join our Forest Carbon Codefest, which is coming up in March. We're really excited to have all of you join us. We think it should be a really fun and also informative and innovative time. And we wanted to just quickly start out by talking a little bit about the event and providing an overview for you. So this Forest Carbon Codefest really has a single most important piece, and that is you. You are an amazing set of participants who will be forming collaborative teams from across industry, academia, and land management. And you will be working together to investigate dynamics between forest disturbances and above ground carbon in the Southern Rocky Mountains. You will be doing that by using ESIIL's cyber infrastructure, as well as a set of data that we will have prepared for you in order to try and expedite the process of moving from data collection and forming a question to actually getting to that analysis. We really want the teams to, get your hands dirty in the data and get to actually some cool results potentially. And we see these three components coming together in the form of your team project, which will be a fully open and reproducible code script, which will be sort of your best attempt at answering your team's defined scientific question in about the 2.5 days that we will have together. We also wanted to just briefly run through the objectives of this event. The first of which is to promote inclusion and scientific innovation, which is really at the heart of ESIIL's mission. And we've tried to do this by bringing together a diverse set of participants. All of you are coming from very different backgrounds and industries, but I think all of you coming together will create some really incredible innovation and creativity. Another example of this is that we will be bringing in some artists in attendance to the event, who you'll get a chance to engage with throughout the event, and who we're hoping can learn from you at the same time as you are learning from them. Along those same lines, we're hoping that this event can establish some new collaborations to promote community building and knowledge exchange. And while we know that not all of you may continue to work in these teams, some of you will, and maybe some of these projects will grow some legs that will continue to take it further. We also hope that this event can be a way that you can develop skills for environmental data science broadly, as well as data-intensive forest carbon research. Over these few virtual events, we will be covering some skills for open science and environmental data science. And then during the event, all of you have some absolutely exceptional expertise and experience, and we're hoping that you can share your skills with those on your team, and together be, a collaborative whole. Another objective here is to create some purposeful playtime for everybody. We know that many of you are working scientists, and that means that you might not actually get as much time playing with data and exploring data as you would like. So we hope that the few days that you have physically here in Boulder can be a time to have some fun and actually look at data and see what might be possible. And finally, we want this to be a space and structure for collaborative data-driven science. And we're hoping that people can get through some sort of finished analysis or product that's something that you can share with others in the community. Running through a very brief timeline here. Today we'll be laying some foundation work. We'll be talking about data, open science, and teamwork with a number of amazing people who are joining us. And next week, we will have our second virtual event, which will be focused on our cloud computing infrastructure that we will use for the event, as well as walking through some of the available data and how we'll be using GitHub as a place to store the open products that we'll be producing. Our final virtual event, the week before the in-person event, will really be about providing some food for thought, getting some presentations from people with very different perspectives on forest carbon. And then you'll have a little bit of time to meet with your team, get to know everyone, and maybe start to coalesce around a theme or idea that everyone's really excited about. We're hoping that you can take some of that brainstorming from the week before and bring it into day one of your in-person time in Boulder, where in the morning, your team will finalize your idea for a project and report out at lunch about what it is that you're going to try and accomplish over the next day and a half. Later that day, you'll begin coding and you'll carry that through day 2, when you'll be working on your project, thinking about deliverables. And then on the morning of day 3, you'll be presenting your project and providing feedback on your colleagues' work. This isn't a Codefest or hackathon where you are presenting to an external panel. We really want this to be more community oriented, and you'll just be presenting to your peers. And that also means that you are the ones who will be voting on your peers' projects and eventually declaring a winner as a community. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Jennifer Balch, who is the director of ESIIL, to give you a little bit more information about the event and ESIIL itself.
Great, thank you, Tyler. And also a big thank you to Tyler McIntosh and Nani Alangakun, who are part of our Earth Lab team helping to pull this event together. They've put in a huge amount of work on this event, and please reach out to them if you have any questions about the Codefest. We also have folks joining us from our ESIIL team, Susan Sullivan, Ty Tuff, and Jim Sinovia, who you'll hear from a little bit later in the morning/afternoon, depending where you're at. So I'm going to go through a couple of guidelines and expectations that we hold for our events, and also share a little bit about ESIIL and the architecture behind ESIIL and what's supporting this event. So the first thing is code of conduct. We just expect everybody to follow some basic guidelines in terms of how we engage with one another and how we respect each other. And if Tyler, if you could post the link to the event code of conduct, that would be great. And the tenets that we hold, there are 4 of them. One is showing respect for each other, listen carefully, being present, being kind, being inclusive, creating space for others, and being self-aware. Like if you're somebody who talks a lot, potentially maybe step back a little bit during this meeting, or if you're somebody who's a little bit more shy, maybe stepping into the conversation space a little bit more. So trying to hold kind of those tensions and honoring that we want everyone to participate and in the conversation, and also in the analytics as well. And committing to ongoing learning, that's a part of our process too. We know that we can always do better in terms of being more welcoming and including more voices in the work that we do. Being collaborative and honoring that people are coming from different backgrounds and disciplines and have something different to offer. There's no weight given to whether you have coding skills or don't have coding skills. We want everybody to come in with their own expertise and be willing to learn and engage and share what they have to offer. We also put a lot of emphasis on intellectual property and data sovereignty. And what that means for this particular meeting is that we are mostly, I'd say, if not 100%, using already open accessible data and data streams. If you have proprietary data, if you have other types of information that should be protected, we don't really want you to bring that into this space in the context of, we don't have a good way to protect that information given the structures and the infrastructure that we have in place. So just kind of knowing that coming into this, like most of what we want to see on the table is data that's already available and public. Also, speaking up, reporting and resources, and I think Susan, will you speak to this a little bit later on as well? So I'll let Susan speak to that, but please know you can certainly reach out to me or Susan if you have concerns about anything that's going on in the meeting that needs to be addressed. And then Susan will provide some more formal resources in a bit. But we definitely want people to feel comfortable. And if you're not feeling comfortable, we want to know so that we can address it as quickly as we can. So those are kind of our basic guidelines for code of conduct. Intellectual credit and authorship, we do have a guidelines document as well that we can share from the ESIIL side of the house. But essentially kind of what we suggest is that you discuss early and often with your teams, kind of what the expectations are for authorship, if there is going to be a paper or a product or a tool that may evolve out of the teams. We also recommend being generous with creating opportunities for contribution as well, trying to make sure that we're, especially with our early careerists in the rooms or in the breakouts, we definitely want to make sure that we're creating opportunities for folks to contribute. Honoring the flow of idea generation, sometimes this can be challenging because somebody throws an idea on the table and then 6 months later, nobody can remember whose idea that was. So flagging that as part of the conversation, if there's an idea that you're holding on to that you really want to share, but you're worried about it not being acknowledged or honored moving forward, like say that and write it down as part of your notes document, or there's other ways to track that too. We generally follow the credit taxonomy, but there are other ways to honor different types of contributions. This taxonomy essentially outlines 14 different ways that contributions can be made. There may be others, but they range from everything to bringing in funding, doing data analytics, building figures, conceptualization, kind of the whole gambit. We do have an example authorship agreement in a self-filled form that can be helpful sometimes for groups working together to figure out, oh, okay, let's agree on authorship. What does that mean? And then let's have everybody fill in their own contributions. Okay, next slide, please. We also have a participant agreement that we've distributed. And the gist of this is that we value open science and want to make sure that we're working in an open science context and framework. And so we're using publicly available data. And we also would ask that you plan to make your workflows and code available as part of our open science objectives as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so who we are, this group, and these are all, if you haven't noticed, Tyler did a wonderful job pulling together some dolly images of collaborative teams working together. But we also use chat to kind of distill information from the applications to get a sense of who we are, and a couple of other questions too that are coming next. This is a diverse group across different disciplines and sectors, and we're pretty excited about that. Everything from data scientists, ecologists, social scientists, engineers, students, land managers. We've got it all in the room, which is pretty exciting. And there's a good reason why that's important, which is that innovation often happens from some of the most diverse groups. And so hold on to that as you're trying to cultivate conversations across your groups and understand different perspectives. Also, there's a keen interest in sharing expertise, learning, and participating in collaborative research. You all have a passion for real world problems and applied research and how we can better understand carbon and the implications for our changing climate. And you all have a commitment to open science and data sharing too, which is really exciting for us to see. So the experience and expertise that our group has, a lot of geospatial data analysis, Earth observing tech, spatial analysis as well. Stats, machine learning, data intensive research. So there's a lot of folks in the room who are coming with these types of expertise areas. Remote sensing, fire and forest ecology, carbon dynamics, carbon markets, carbon monitoring. So there's a lot going on in this group. And some of the things that you're interested in. machine learning models for carbon stock prediction. So again, these are all chat versions of your application, so take all of this with a grain of salt. Interdisciplinary data synthesis for carbon monitoring, disturbance impacts on carbon markets, ecosystem service assessments, and development of open source tools for carbon analysis. So some of the staging questions that we had thrown out to the group to kind of get you thinking about different opportunities and challenges. One was around how does spatial and temporal scale of disturbance impact above ground forest carbon in both the short and long term? How do interactions between multiple disturbances impact forest carbon recovery trajectories? How do disturbances drive ecosystem transformations, and how can we model those? And what are the ways in which we may best improve above ground carbon data sets and models? And this is an opportunity for you all to get engaged too and help flag some questions that you want to get into as we're working together. But please post in the chat now if you have ideas of things that you absolutely are excited to work on, and we'll kind of keep that in mind as we start shaping the teams and the groups in the next couple of virtual sessions. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk about ESIIL, which is a new data synthesis center funded by NSF. And what's the relationship here between EarthLab and ESIIL? EarthLab hosts a lot of the research that we do at the university, and ESIIL is a nationally facing organization that hosts a lot of different activities to bring scientists and groups of people together, work on data intensive problems. Next slide, please. So we all know our environment is rapidly changing, and the upshot of this picture, I took this picture of the Marshall Fire while it was happening, and data can help. We have been analyzing that fire event using all kinds of different remote sensing observations and publicly available data, and also some proprietary data from Zillow to understand home loss and home structural features. So I think you all are probably here because you know this too, in the sense that data provides lots of opportunities to help us drive at solutions for our major environmental challenges. Next slide, please. Our mission at ESIIL is to empower an inclusive and diverse community to accelerate environmental data science. And out of our core values and reflections, we center people, innovation, and learning. Next slide, please. There are 4 major components to ESIIL: the science that we do, which leverages diverse data streams and data cubes, creating inclusive spaces for brainstorming and idea generation; our cyber infrastructure capabilities, which help to migrate workflows and work into the cloud; our education efforts, which focus on teaching data skills to folks who really want to use it for environmental applications. And then diversity and inclusion is a huge part of what we do across the entire organization, from how we think about our governance to how we recruit to how we make sure that people are comfortable in the spaces that they're in. Next slide, please. And thank you to those piling in on the chat, putting in questions. That's fantastic. We have a lot of different data sources at our fingertips, from remote sensing to national observatories like NEON, which is also collecting information on carbon, social media data, and other types of social information, protected data, modeled data, collections, all kinds of different data. And so it can be kind of overwhelming to get into this space of oh my gosh, where do I start? But there's a lot of opportunity in that space, and we're here to help facilitate use of lots of different kinds of data. Okay, next slide. So cyber infrastructure. So Ty, I think you're probably going to speak to this a little bit more later, but ESIIL's approach is cloud native. We build lots of different libraries to help people get what they need, whether it's a data registry or education repositories, container repos, or also kind of choose your own adventure in terms of which cloud compute platform you want to use, whether it's Cyverse or proprietary cloud. So we've got lots of solutions. You're going to hear more about that in a bit. And also too, the infrastructure that's supporting this meeting is based on Cyverse, which is NSF's investment in cloud architecture. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to keep an eye on some of our activities moving forward, ESIIL hosts an annual summit. this year's annual summit is happening in May, the Big Data for Environmental Resilience and Adaptation. We sponsor hackathons. There's one ongoing right now, co-sponsored by a French company on flood prediction. Working groups, we just announced 7 working groups. We're going to have a new call sometime in the fall for working groups, small groups of people working together, kind of like this. If you want to come to Boulder and you want to bring together a group of people, please apply in the next round. We also will have a call sometime this spring for postdocs. We just hired 3 who started in January, and we'll hire several more to work on data intensive projects that are focused on environmental applications. Data short courses coming, our ESIIL STARS program, which supports minority serving institutions, student and faculty driven projects that are data intensive. And also our web portal, if you haven't found it yet, earthdatascience.org, which thanks to Max Joseph on this call for naming that website, is our learning portal that hosts, I don't know how many modules now, but it's in the hundreds, and we get over 1 million users a year to that site, all Python based, all open. So if you want to learn more Python skills, that's a good place to do it. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to skip this one because I mostly talked about that. We also study how we do the work that we do. So we are also investigating team science and trying to learn how teams work best together and what are the conditions that create innovation and new ideas. Next slide, please. And we also do a lot of work with tribal partners and are developing our own tribal engagement strategy to better understand how we can create a shared vision around working with tribes, tribal colleges, and organizations. And the key part here is shared and co-developed. We've worked with Oglala Lakota College, United Tribes Technical College, and Jim Sinovia, who you'll hear from more, is going to share more about our work in this space. Next slide, please. Okay, up next, Susan Sullivan, and then Jim Sinovia and Ty Tuff. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. Susan, do you want to go ahead and share your slides? You might be muted.
Yeah, sorry. Had a technical problem. So I expect you were looking for me and I wasn't here. Is that correct?
Yes, Jennifer just wrapped up.
Okay. If this happens again, I'm going to come in with my phone, and Tyler, I'll ask you to run the slides then, just so you have the link handy. And I will, first of all, give you all the link to the slides so you have them as well. And then I will I will share them. So here's the link, everybody. Let me get into there. There we go. And now I will attempt to share. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I've got loading. Okay, good. Are you able to see those slides? Okay, great. So I am Susan Sullivan. I am the ESIIL DEI lead, and I have been part of CERES, the host institute for ESIIL, for a long, long time, more than 30 years, and very happy to be here with you. So first of all, one of the things that we strive for in ESIIL is to make sure that we are collaboration ready, make sure that we know what to expect, and know that we all have permission to take care of ourselves and to say what we would like to about ourselves to other people or not. And so one of the things I'll be doing here is telling you what you can expect from ESIIL and some more about how we enact the things that Jennifer was talking about in terms of inclusivity. So in our virtual events like this one and the subsequent ones, please consider video on because it increases engagement and belonging for the group. However, if you need to take your video off to take a break or something, go ahead. I know everybody's got their culture that they primarily do video on or video off. And so we're trying to help you have a balance in terms of taking care of yourself and also being part of the group. Generally, you should be able to rename yourself to include your pronouns. My pronouns are she, her. Your organizational affiliation, if you like, or your tribal affiliation, whatever you'd like us to know. For captioning, you can turn on captioning and go down to more and start captions. And also, generally, these things will be recorded. Often there's a transcript. And then I'll reiterate this for our physical events. Remember about confidentiality. Just as we're making sure that we credit people's ideas and contributions to our work, we also want to remind everybody that that kind of sharing, professional and also personal, whatever we share about ourselves and identities, it requires trust to be able to be transparent about all these things or to be able to share about yourself. So remember that people who tell you things are telling only the people who are in the room right then. And you want to keep that, you want to keep it to yourself and honor that, that you have been told something that isn't necessarily to be shared with other people. Now, let's see, here we go. Now, Jennifer showed you the simple version of the ESIIL mission and the pillars that we are resting on in our mission. And I don't expect you to read all this or to, there's a lot of text on this slide and you can look at it later with that link. But really, inclusion comes into all of the aspects of ESIIL. And because of that, there are a whole lot of skills. I like to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion skills that somebody in ESIIL and somebody in your team, somebody in the organizing team around you, that we need to possess these skills in order to be successful in the mission. Otherwise, if it was easy, if we already had these skills, we'd already be doing all of this kind of ESIIL work as a matter of course. And so this is an incomplete list of the kinds of skills that we are promoting as part of the ESIIL mission, so that it's not just a topic, it's something we know and are able to do. For our purposes here for Codefest, some of it is knowing things like what Jim's going to talk about in terms of data sovereignty and what we're going to talk about in terms of open science. It's about knowing how to work in a team that is diverse, not only in discipline and in career stage, but also in identity and culture and all kinds of things. So each one of these has its own set of abilities that go with it to making the team and the group functional and innovative. The reason we invest the amount of time and money that we do in trying to foster diversity and inclusion is that it leads to what we think is better science, more relevant science, more innovative science, more useful science. So those are the ways I think about it. I think about it in terms of skills usually. And in inclusivity, in equity and diversity, in environmental risk, in team science, in community-based research or engaged scholarship, resiliency. These things all require parallel skill sets. So you may have thought about being an ally before or put a lot of effort into learning to be an ally, and everyone can be an ally, no matter how many identities you yourself hold. There are always other people's identities, so we can all learn how to be allies to one another, regardless of where we're starting. When you want to communicate about issues, especially controversial issues, which have to do with what are we going to do and how do we think about ourselves in relation to the world or to how we do things. Team science, meaning how do we be functional together, and doing research that actually promotes resilience for communities. They're all parallel. They all require skills in listening, learning, accepting feedback, and I'm going to say especially when it's uncomfortable, and building trust, having a bias towards trust and respect, thinking about the give and take of the relationship, and also persistence, that this isn't a one and done. These things are all more or less a lifelong journey, and that we're here to take action. We're here to make things better. So all of these things are parallel, and I like to point that out because regardless of where you're coming from or what your interests are, you can approach it holistically, and you probably have skills somewhere that you can transfer to the work you're doing here. And it's not different. It's very useful in many areas of life and many areas of the work we want to do. So what we know about people who come to ESIIL so far, Jennifer focused primarily on people's professional backgrounds and some of their goals. But we have a wide diversity of career stage. Often we have a lot of early career people who come to events. We have good diversity when it comes to gender and LGBTQIA+ community. We've got a diversity of disciplines, research motivations. It's a real goal to come up with research problems or projects that will meet the needs of environmental researchers, data science or computer science researchers, and lead to useful outcomes when it comes to community resilience, or in this case, forest carbon, forest management, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So figuring out disparate goals is a big part of it. We've got different institutional context in terms of whether you come from a nonprofit, a research-intensive academic environment, a minority-serving institution, race and ethnicity. At ESIIL, we have a significant, a lot of people who come with conditions of neurodiversity or chronic illness, other people with disabilities, people with family responsibilities, whether it be children or elders, the whole gamut. And so we are working to include as much diversity as we can to be part of our mission and part of the solutions. So that's where we've been so far. You can feel free to put this in the chat if you like, which, by the way, I can't see right now, or just think about it. But where do you hope to build your expertise within ESIIL and within this project, the Forest Carbon Codefest, or contribute your expertise? And when I say that, I don't just mean your technical expertise. I mean your ability to work in a group. I also mean your knowledge of the communities that you've come from, or the communities that you work with or partner with. And I mean the expertise that comes from the life you've lived. So these are all the things that we hope you will bring with you to ESIIL and to this event. So Tyler will send out these resources, but because I think about this work as being skills-based, there are some resources here to help you with some of the things that can be hard in when you're just stepping into ESIIL, wanting to be collaboration ready. Or not hard, maybe something to think about ahead of time. We do have a poster that describes those things that Jennifer was talking about. Oftentimes we have that poster on a table when you're in the physical space. Another resource is calling people in. So if somebody says something that doesn't land well, we're like, I don't get that, or that didn't sit right with me. We like to call it calling people in instead of calling people out. It's approaching the issue, or it's approaching it with curiosity, basically, and an approach to learn and try to understand first. And then if you need to, you can always say, well, from my perspective, it feels like this when in this conversation. So that's something to look at. If you're the person who's concerned about something that you see, or the direction of a conversation, you can interrupt it, and there's a tool that will give you some ways to think about that. Oftentimes, if there's something that doesn't land right, you don't know what to do kind of in the moment. If you're the one who did the thing, if you're the one who said the thing, and it has not landed right with someone, what do you do then? This is how to apologize is a nice description of how to just address it in the moment and be able to move on and learn without it turning into a big thing. We're all just learning. And then there's a couple of resources here that we've used in other events, and no doubt Jim will refer to some of these concepts and some of these terms. But what is ethical space? So that's something that James Rattlingleaf on our ESIIL team talks about. And what is indigenous and tribal sovereignty? And there's more. So these are just some beginning things to look at. There's a link here to a Google Doc that has some papers and some other things to look at when you're thinking about how am I going to collaborate now that I jump into ESIIL. And I know that I spent some of my time being like kicked off the internet. So I will try to get through a little faster here. To be a little bit more specific about some of the things that Jennifer was talking about, being curious and listening to understand. One tool, if you're a person who carries a lot of privilege in academic spaces or research spaces, typically, you probably also have a lot of good things to say that the group would benefit from. So I like to encourage people who either find themselves taking up a lot of space verbally, or who are less comfortable jumping in and saying, hey, everybody, I've got an idea. To use the group documents to capture your ideas and all of their great nuance and complexity. And that's a way to essentially make more space instead of just the verbal space. And then it's a balance of being purposeful and to the point so that others can speak, and looking for taking the time to make sure other people can speak, even if they speak a lot slower than you do, even if you know what they're going to say. Let them, or you think you do, let them finish. So that's part of it. And like Jennifer said, we always want to be better. So if things aren't going right, or if there's something you think we could do better, we would really love to know about it. When you are in the physical space, and I'll just say, Tyler will make sure you know about these things. We've got some resources for you when you get to the physical space, including lactation rooms, sensory rooms, all gender restrooms, etc. Microphones if you're hard of hearing. Whatever you need, we'd like to know. So please let us know if you think there's something that we may not already be providing. There is an anonymous feedback form you can use if you'd like to give us some ideas for improvement. That goes to me. And you can contact me, or you can contact Becca Edwards, who is the person who will physically be at University of Colorado when you're there in March. These are all available to you. And then lastly, we know that it's not enough to have diversity. We know that we also need inclusion and equity in order to get the innovation that we want. It's teams can break apart when there's so much diversity that people can't get together, or the conflict isn't resolved, or if there's conflict and it's not resolved, you don't get the best of what everyone brings. And so we know we need all of these things in order to get to innovation and useful science. And then always I like to ask, I guess it's sort of like follow the money, but it's basically who's benefiting and who is being rewarded, who is being supported, where is someone having a different experience than mine, and what blind spots do we have? When we get a diverse group together, of course, we don't know what we don't know, but when we get a diverse group together, we're more likely to have someone say, hey, you're failing to recognize this. And so if that's you, please let us know what we're failing to recognize, and let us know how we can do better. So that's all I've got. I want to thank you for being here and for being part of the Forest Carbon Codefest and ESIIL. And I'll turn it over. Thank you. Stop share.
Thanks so much, Susan. That was great. Are there any questions that anybody has for Susan quickly before we move on? I don't think we've seen anything in the chat. I just want to leave a moment for that. Okay. Well, in that case, Jim, I think you are up. If you want to go ahead and share your slides.
Okay. Sec here. Okay, can you see that and not my notes? Okay. All right. How Jimmy Machia, si Changu Lakota Atena. Hello. Hello, my name is Jim. I come from the Burnt Fire Rosebud people.
Hey Jim, your microphone's giving a little, it's breaking up a little bit. I don't know, maybe check the plug a little bit.
Is that any better? Oh, okay. All right, I'll start over. How Jimmy Machia, si Changu Lakota Atehan Uyelo. Hello, my name is Jim. I come from the Burnt Thigh, the Rosebud people, one of the 7 bands of the Lakota Oyate. I'm a road travel member of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, and it's an honor to be here, and thank you for having me. Here at ESIIL, I'm the Tribal Resilience Data Scientist. I've been here for a year and a half. For 20 years or so before that, I was with Ogallala Lakota College as faculty in their STEM department. And so last year and a half, I've been here with ESIIL and I've been with you all longer than that, like 5 years or something like that. And into the Earth data science realm and helping promote this nationally to our tribal partners. So this is a mixture of ideas in this presentation of of, thrusting Indian country into the data revolution, if you will. Just a little, it's like my idea is to basically help bridge that gap between ESIIL and Earth data science in general and climate and all that with tribal partners. And so I work with a lot of TCUs and tribal partners throughout the country on and data sovereignty being one of those initiatives. And data sovereignty has always been an issue for me, and it still is, because I haven't seen it. In the 20 years, everyone's been doing publications after publications and talking about it. I thought, where's the data? You're talking all about the data sovereignty. Show me the project, show me the work. And so, I haven't seen it really applied, if you will. But before I tell you this, I need to show you how Indian people think. Tribal people think. They're going to think differently when you start talking to them about science. And I'll show you some slides here that kind of help demonstrate that. So when you think data, this might be and you're talking about data and all that, this is probably where their minds are going when you're telling them. Probably when you're talking about data sovereignty too, this is probably right where they're going, is to their communities and their youth and their students. And that's where they're going to think when you're sitting there talking about data sovereignty. This is what's on their mind when you're going, yeah, we can do this cool remote sensing project, teach your students. Well, them and their students are probably here communicating with you as you may want to communicate, but this is part of their thought process. And just thinking about ways, community ways. And so there's lots of data in here, as you can see. Circled a couple. The bison, they're butchering a bison. Very big movements happening now with this, where people, getting back to traditional ways, and of course picking berries, and where's the data sovereignty behind this, and we have some examples that I can show you here. And then I've been promoting this for many years now. Is my wife and her students, she used to teach at tribal college too, but they came up with this red van or white van. Are you here to be a partner and work with us? Or are you a one and done and you're taking off, the white van? And so I think, most people here are on board with being a red van, being a true partner and helping us work these things out. Because they're hard. Now it's hard doing an application of data sovereignty. So this is just kind of a method that I often take, and I think a lot of TCUs and tribes are taking. Everyone kind of starts off with some LiDAR-ish idea project. Not everyone, but everyone probably needs it. And that quickly turns into big data. We need to move into the open source Earth data science realm, and then the CI, and then applications, and then data sovereignty is in there. TEK is in there. Where and how do you do that? Instead of just charging forward with analytics, these have to come in play too before they come and catch you, and not catch you, but bite you in the butt, if you will, or catch up with you in some way you didn't, unintended way. And so we have been working with Indian country. And what I mean by Indian country, it's a very broad term. I mean TCUs, tribal colleges and universities. I can mean reservations, tribal communities, Indian people, wherever they are. So Indian country and that whole kind of covers that whole idea. But we're training them and showing them the complexity of labeling something with data sovereignty. Because it sure is easy to talk about. We need to do the ethical right thing, make sure it's safe. But what does that look like behind the scenes? No, I don't think everyone's ever seen that until Earth Lab and ESIIL has helped come along and helped us with these endeavors. Here's a project I did when I was faculty at OLC on just building data for the tribal colleges. Tribal colleges are in each town at Oglala College. It's a decentralized campus. So we started building infrastructure. And we realized, we can't work with LiDAR at big scales, only at towns, because it's big data. And our laptops can't do anymore. So what happens with this data? What happens with our partners that helped us with this? And so this is helping us see inside of the data. Sure, I can look at the pretty map, and that's what our partners have always helped us with. Here we did some analytics, did some cool things. Great. We learned nothing. But here you can see the work off to the side that we did with you, and things are we're starting to see the data and data sovereignty and going, oh, I have much more control over this than just having you handle all the analytics. Here's just another example. Really dive into deeper data sovereignty here. And I won't talk too much about it. This is my last project that I did when I was at Agora College, looking for structures of LiDAR. They weren't just any structures, but and so we never really worked out the data sovereignty here because it's hard when you start applying it. But we did come up with agreements to share things and talk about it. Public relation talks, the OLC did agree for us to give public announcements on this. And so, but not the data, it's like this presentation I can't share with you because these blocks can be moved for locations and all that. And I know you wouldn't do anything with it, but I would be breaking my word with them as we figure things out. And luckily we have OLC to lean on, and they're working with the tribe to help figure out these new levels of data sovereignty. And so we really have them to lean on to help move forward on applications of it. All right. Uh-oh. Okay, you there? Like, I think I might have cut out. And so I don't know if I needed this slide, but maybe. So here is an example of, this took me an hour and a half to make through ArcGIS. And I've been doing ArcGIS for 20 years. So I'm pretty fast, pretty efficient with data, working with things in there. And this took me an hour and a half. My students, heck, this would probably be a semester project plus I was teaching. I show them the power of Earth data science and open source. This took Nate 15 minutes to get that pretty hill shade on the end. And it took me an hour and a half. And, those ideas were sold on, like, oh, that's the efficiency. And his quality of his hill shade was just way better than the one I made from scratch. But my question to you, is there data sovereignty to talk about here? Where does it kick in? We don't need to answer that right now, but has enough been done, to start calling this open source data and start going in the realm of data sovereignty and getting more private. Here's an example Nate and Elsa did last summer with predicting Timsla. It's a prairie turnip, using open source data, all on the left-hand side. But now they came up with analytics on the left. Now what do we do? What happens with the map, with the data? What about publications you may need to do for NSF? How do you do that? Because we're supposed to report, right? What about public announcements or, for some PR? Just our students did a great thing this summer, just a little articles going out. How do you do that? And what about showing images? How can you best help these participants protect their data? And you could just stop and do nothing and say, well, I'm not going to do anything more with this. I'm out. It's theirs. But let's not leave them hanging. We need to tell them how they can best protect their data, so they can truly hold on to that data sovereignty idea. Been producing the idea of creating data cubes in Indian country, together. So I put that Teye Chashka all together with data sovereignty in mind, because infrastructure lacks on probably 90% of reservations. Some tribes are pretty fortunate. And those tribes that are fortunate usually live really close to a big city, and they're usually well off in this realm, but most tribes don't. And so they have nothing. And if they did have something, it'll be gone because turnover rate happens, high turnover rate. And so they're left with nothing. So we want to work on giving them something to keep forever, as long as we can. And data cubes is a hot topic right now with our TCUs. They are so very interested in this. Here's another example Sabelli made of just a mini data cube at Haskell when we did something for them. Oh, they just love this, you know. All open source. But what happens now, you know, and this seems like something that'll always remain open source because it's climate, right? And same here with Ty Tuff's climate CFT work at the same location. But there's two things here. There's the data infrastructure that he had to create, and then the analytics from it. And those are two different awesome things that are both so needed. The geospatial infrastructure here, that's the first thing we need before we can even think science. And so what happens to that? The data sovereignty to that, and then the analytics, of course, almost seems easier because you did analytics. A tribe would certainly want to keep a hold of that. Probably not climate data, but what if Ty accidentally found something culturally in his work? You know, what happens then? What do we do? But yeah, these are things. It's not like they don't tribal partners don't want us there, don't want work to be done. They most certainly do. It's just working out these agreements and talking with them. And that's what our tribal engagement is doing, is getting these talks out of the way so we can build trust. That's why OLC and Oglala Sioux Tribe are willing to just kind of march forward with this, not having everything in place because of trust. Maybe because me and James are here too as well, right? But there's trust has been built over years, and it takes years. And we have that now with our TCU partners as well. And that helps with other TCU partners on talking about data sovereignty, because they're like, oh, well, CU Boulder and ESIIL, you know, they have a couple native guys there. They've been working with some TCUs. And so, you know, and I think that's helped grow our participants, such as this. You know, as of last summer, we were up. I think this is growing since then, but ESIIL, we have, you know, picked up 15 to 20 TCUs. There's only 37, by the way. There's many, many more tribes, but there's only 37 TCUs. Some of those TCUs have several tribes that go in on it and form a tribal college, but there's only 37 total. So we should be at the halfway mark by now on getting them all. We may not get them all. And our next initiatives are to bring tribal governments on board. Much more difficult. We'd be happy to get 1 or 2 a year, which I think we've done this year so far, but it's tough. That takes years of trust. And so trust as in, you know, now our partners showed up, UTTC and Oglala Lakota College at our last Innovation Summit. Things can start to take place because of trust. We can't do data sovereignty yet until that trust is made. And James always tells me trust can take 5 years. When you start working with someone, plan on taking it 5 years before they're willing to make a move with you. And they need to see your track record and all that. And so, you know, James has been doing this for decades now. So we have all that. And just, you know, we formed I don't know if these slides need to be in here, but this is going to be a great group to showcase everything I just talked about. Intertribal, interagency. So there's tribal government in this group. There are TCUs. There are tribal orgs like Native Biodata. There are community members, tribal community members. And there are university faculty and organizations like NCAR and NEON. Very unique group. And along with this, creating a data cube is going to come the data sovereignty. What's it look like and actually applied? So this will be a pretty neat outcome. And this itself will probably take a few years. And here is, don't just talk about data sovereignty, dive into potential scenarios. What does it look like? Who has the keys? Remember, we've had about 20 years of data sovereignty talk. Let's demonstrate next steps. These are next steps. I like to look at the sovereign enclave on the left, and everyone really loves the image. None of us have any clue of what it is, but we're like, oh, all right, that's the data behind data sovereignty, huh? And I go, yeah, I think so. these arrows and these different colored pods here represent where our data is going, what's happening, who has access to it, analytics, storage, everything. These are where you need keys. This is how long the keys will last you, and so on. This is, I think, examples of actual data sovereignty and no longer talking about it. And, we're doing it. We haven't done it yet, but we're going to do it, and it's going to be cool. And so some questions, does training include, so just when we do this, what's cool about Earth Lab and ESIIL is they brought along faculty. Most universities or training entities just train students. And this has been a lot stronger partnership because faculty are being taught too, and they can spread that to classrooms, use it to promote the next round of students, and provide a more, longer lasting relationships. And so what happens to TCU tribal data after training? The training is over, those are things we need to think about. We don't have them figured out yet, but, luckily we have our tribal partners right now to help us figure that out. And I think other TCUs and tribes will look at that and follow in suit, or at least templates will be set up. More training and advanced training, all the way from beginning to advanced. It's always been at the beginning, intro training. Indian country has been only had access to. So it's nice to see this advanced options and potential here. And, I like to throw this at when I speak to tribal people, TCUs or tribal government people, I always tell them, I can find your culture. And if I can't, I know enough engineers and data scientists who could help me find your everything. And you should see their face. Oh. And I go, but just know that it's already happening. Not by me. Like, this is a Facebook group of just civilians. They're like, where I found these Indian mounds in some state, and I'm gonna go hike there tomorrow and learn. It's like, and other members will call them out. No, you're gonna go there and loot. They're all, no, I'm just gonna go there and learn about culture and our history. And they're all, have you contacted state archaeology or the tribe? They're all, why? Why should I? So this is a new thing I'm throwing at our tribal partners, saying, all right. And for example, the Rosebud Sioux tribe was very proud to tell me, Jim, we talked with the USGS and they blocked the LiDAR data. And I'm all, all right, we'll see. And so I found access to it, and I haven't told them yet, but there's still plenty of loopholes. It's a start though. I have a feeling they just kind of blocked it at their two main websites access, but there are many other angles in which to get that data to work with. So that's it. Wopila.
Thank you so much, Jim. That was great. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here to talk about it with us. Yeah, so as with all of these presentations today, these are sort of just different contexts that we're hoping that you will bring to the work during this Forest Carving Codefest. And think about different ways in which pieces of this might be relevant to the questions that you might want to ask with the data that you might be using. And our last speaker today is Dr. Ty Tuff. Ty, do you want to share your screen and go ahead?
Sure do. I'll try to keep it high energy since you guys have been sitting there for an hour or however long you've been sitting here. Hopefully we can keep you entertained and run through the end of the afternoon here. Okay, so you're going to hear from me again next week in an entirely different context when we talk about how to actually open the computers and play around the computers. Today, we're going to talk at a much higher level, just generally about where we want data to come from, how we want to use data, and what open source means. Okay. So I have been leaning hard on this computer as a kitchen analogy over the last year because it seems to really resonate with people. So if you think about the hardware inside your computer, we have a hard drive that stores all of your data, and that would be the cabinets in your kitchen that store all the ingredients that you want to cook with. And then we have a big countertop, and if you pull stuff out, you can cook it on your countertop, and that's your big RAM chip. And then we go and we bake and stuff in the oven, or we cook stuff on the countertop. So the CPU, you cook one pot at a time, and the GPU, you can jam in a whole big tray and bake it all at once. Now, often when we think about setting up computer infrastructure, we think about how to balance all of these things. Sort of how do we make the size of the oven and the size of the countertop and the size of the cabinets all the rough size that they need to be so you can move through what you're trying to cook. Today, though, and so that is what you're going to hear me talk a lot about next week, is just setting up that kitchen appropriately for the things you're going to want to cook. But that kitchen is indifferent to what you cook. And that's the conversation we're going to have today, is about your sourcing of ingredients. And the sourcing of the ingredients is up to the chef. And you're going to notice that dietary preferences, while they differ wildly across the spectrum. One of my favorite jokes to make about Boulder is that it is sort of the heart of voluntary dietary restrictions. It's like absolutely every person has their own dietary restriction that you have to take care of. And we have, Whole Foods caters to these things and is the most popular grocery store in town and all of these things. But the point is, you can make a lot of different choices about what you eat and how you prepare. Some of that is cultural. Some of that you inherited from the way you were trained to eat. Some of that is based on what you have access to. Some of that is based on who your friends are and who you're serving dinner to. How many people are eating? How long do you need to stay good? There are all kinds of choices that go into what you eat. But you notice that a lot of people, not everyone, a lot of people have a fairly omnivorous diet, and they sort of go about eating things opportunistically. But you notice a lot of people sort of isolate themselves in these restricted categories voluntarily. They'll call themselves a vegan or a vegetarian or a carnivore or paleo or I only eat fast food, junk food person. But these people are self-defining sort of an ethic of what they're going to consume and how they're going to consume it and how they're going to source the ingredients. Now, the open source movement matches this analogy in lots and lots and lots of ways. And when we think about the modern interpretation of the open source movement, it is much like a farm-to-table version of a food ethic. So it is saying, I want to know where everything came from. And I generally want all of that to be grown in a natural way. I want that to be harvested in a fairly timely manner, like in recent times. And then I want to be prepared transparently and served in a way that sort of exhibits its natural characters. That is a very unique dietary style that you see very, very few people on the planet abiding by. And in the data analytics world, the open source is sort of like held up as a perfect way of doing the whole thing. And you see people taking bits and parts of it and defining it in their very own way. So let's just talk about the basic ingredients that hold this whole thing together by starting with the origin story of where this all came from. Okay, so let's go back to the early 90s. Computers have finally gotten small enough to go around to everywhere. So, you start getting personal computers in the 80s, but the 90s is where it's sort of like lots of houses have these things. I have the NCS logo up here. In 1992, the very first NSF Synthesis Center came to life. And its whole purpose was, if we're going to do synthesis, we need people to get on airplanes with their hard drive and fly them to the same location so we can plug them into the same computer and have the data in the same place. And so, right, we've come a long way from this place, but this brought to light these two things. One, this like physicality of bringing data together. All of a sudden now people are starting to write amateur data use agreements between each other. And those are going wildly wrong. There are a lot of bad actors, a lot of people stealing data and putting them together in the larger data sets, a lot of lack of transparency, a lot of making up data because now it's easy to just fabricate things quickly. And everyone is sort of struggling with, how do we make a trust system for data? And then alongside of that, you have a lot of proprietary software that's becoming inaccessible to people. So people are trying to steal data software, like Microsoft service packs, or maybe an Excel. Maybe people in this call at earlier stages in their life used some type of bootlegged version of Microsoft Word or Excel, right? This was the culture that was bred, is like there was proprietary software and then you would steal it, and then how do you cite stolen software? And so people started to make copies of software in a way that was allowed to be licensed. So that was this movement of like, oh man, we have run into these really big problems. How do we make data shareable in an ethical way? And how do we make software accessible to people who need to use it and not have everything behind a paywall? This is super text heavy, but this is sort of my bridge between everything. So don't feel like you need to read all of this. Just going to conceptually bring these three parts together. So in this farm to table model of food, we think about the sourcing, the preparation, and the service of that food. So now if we bridge over to the open source movement, now let's think about those three parts. We have the sourcing of the ingredients, we have the preparation of those ingredients, and then we have the service of those ingredients in our deliverables. Okay, so the sourcing, this is where we often hear about open source data, quote unquote. Okay, so open source in this case means that it has a license attached to it that gives you the legal right to use it, and some rules come along with that legal right. So depending on which specific license those data sets have, those impart on you a set of rights for that data set. Now, as you source things, much like if you were in your farm to table restaurant and you did 60% organic ingredients and 40% traditional conventional ingredients with pesticides, you would not be able to serve your meal and call it organic. So if you're sort of only as good as your dirtiest license or your least open license. So if you go and source 90% open source data sets and then you throw one proprietary data set in at the end, you have created a proprietary data set. You have not created an open data set. And you're not allowed to impart a bunch of new rights on those original data sets. You can't now all of a sudden make them open just because you have put them into a new packaging. So as we think about sourcing our ingredients, it's a lot of questions that you should ask. Where was this created? Where was this data set created? Why was it created? Who created it? And what were they motivated to do? Did they cite their sources? So we can see clear provenance of sort of where the thing came from and how it was built. Do I think that they did it ethically? You know, Jim just gave us lots of examples about data sovereignty and ways that we might question the legitimacy of particular data sets if they're not honoring our ethic. But again, this is, you are the chef, right? You're the one making the ethical decisions here. Open source is just a name, sort of like a vegetarian diet that you're trying to subscribe to. Sometimes you're going to cheat. Sometimes you're going to bend on your diet. It's just sort of a way for all of us collectively to sort of define a collective ethic on how we want to do this. And then that has spawned a bunch of legal documents that sort of back up particular viewpoints. So when you go source documents, you're going to see a combination of maybe 5 or 6 possible Creative Commons licenses that may be attached to open data. And those are going to restrict what you're able to do with them. Some of those allow you to copy and paste them into your own document and go sell that immediately and make money. This person is sharing without asking anything in return, and you can immediately go and make profit off of these things if you wanted to. Then they slightly get more restrictive where you have to cite the person and you're not allowed to make money. Then you can cite them and you're allowed to make money. Or you can do none of those things. None of the things are all those things, but there's essentially a gradient across which the rules become more or less relaxed. So when you collect all your data sets, you should go and look at your sourcing and see sort of what standard you held up to and what you're able to advertise your products as based on the ingredients you used. The preparation, this gets more at the software part and being transparent in the way that you do things. So in ESIIL, we set up GitHub repos and have everybody sort of code almost in public. You're not doing it on a Twitch stream or something, but anybody can sort of peek in on your GitHub anytime they want and see what's going on. And so for something like that, you want to attach your license early so people know what they can and cannot do with that information. and you're giving them open access to being able to watch you do it. This can go across software and hardware and manufacturing types. So this isn't just for software, but it would be in the farm to table equivalent. It's that you're cooking out where everybody can see what you're doing. You're not hiding anything from anyone. They can just watch the whole process and go build on that themselves if they want to. The third one, this service, this is where you actually serve the meal to everyone. And for you in the data world, this is where you produce something, maybe a publication, maybe a data set, maybe a publication describing a data set, maybe a software package that it has a publication attached to it. And all of those could have different licenses. The licensees are saying how people are allowed to use them and what their obligations are afterwards. But that conflicts with this other commercial label of open access. The access is different than the license. The access is just whether it's behind a paywall or not. So you could have something that has been open source from the beginning. You used open source data. You did an open source preparation on GitHub and everybody can see your code. You did preprint open source authoring of your publication, and then you submit it to Nature and they put it behind a paywall. So then that thing would be called open source, but closed access. Alternatively, you could use entirely private data sets that nobody else can use and write a manuscript that describes something that you did on these completely closed, not open to the public data. And then you could pay the $5,000 or $10,000 that Nature asks for open access. And then people can freely go read your publication because it's an open access publication, even though it wasn't open source. So that was sort of just an commercial marketing co-opting of the name that offers a lot of confusion for people when they're trying to figure out what to do with their data. Okay. So here are just some examples of, on the licensing side, where different things would fit. So for the open source data, one of the exemplars is GBIF, the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. They define a lot of the open source methods. They invest in legal definitions of these things. They are really on the forefront of working with Creative Commons to do this the right way. The contrary to that would be the sort of most restrictive of the Creative Commons licenses, where you're saying you are not allowed to make derivatives of this. You're not allowed to copy it. You're not allowed to use it for commercial use. If you use any information, you have to cite it, and you can only use it as a citation. Okay, so that's just saying there's a gradient of and you can find different data sets that fall in every category of least restrictive to most restrictive. Open software, Cyverse, which we use, is the open cloud funded by the NSF. And so it's using all open software to do that. We try to get everybody to do their analyses in R or Python because those are the most popular open source analytics software. There are thousands of open source software packages. Essentially, in this context, it means you can go and open any function you want and change it or modify it. Not for everybody, but for your own. You can go as far down in the code as you want and change something about how the whole thing works, and you have control over all of it. Alternatives to that are not open, the Esri ArcGIS software is not open. You're not allowed to modify things in there to meet your own needs. You can add on to them, but you can't modify them. Google Earth Engine is also the same. And this one's confusing for a lot of people because it feels very open, but you're not allowed to go and modify a lot of the underlying architecture. You're not allowed to export a lot of things. And so it falls in that not open software. And then for publishing, really, this is a reiteration of the first point where it's about the license that you choose. But since I had a little bit of real estate, I said, well, there are open publishing platforms like Zenodo, where they're trying to make a space for open publishing, trying to make a space for long-term DOIs of open information. And then there are on the other side are just institutions going against that, right? So AWS is trying to be more secure and more private and less open for all the businesses that want that. And you have new licenses that are pushing sort of how much you're able to lock down data even beyond the current existing framework. Just a couple more slides and then we'll be done. So far I've talked a lot about the open science movement, which is the data that up through the service. In this constellation of the open world, there is the access. So the one note I already made about access is this open access that you can pay a journal, where you're just paying the viewing fees for any possible viewer indefinitely, and so people can see your thing for free. But people have really built upon that idea of saying, okay, open access should not just be by someone who can Google really well and find their way around a lot of paywalls. If we're doing this ethic right, we would then be saying, okay, let's make things fair. And so fair means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. This essentially means found by a computer, not by a person. So you can write code to consistently go and find data sets out in the world, out in the network, and bring those in a reliable, reusable way. So fair is about, okay, let's play out this access thing and make it really big and really easy and really uniform. People have even built out past that of saying, okay, if we're going to think about this ethic, this open ethic across the entire spectrum, let's think about it can we make a more general framework? So trust here is just one of these frameworks that's coming out that you might have another one. You're probably going to see more in the literature. The boundary, the discussion right now is about how to make a holistic system that can simplify all of this and give people for sort of simpler rules for matching the hardware and just sort of the whole system that they're building and make it apply to these ethics. We also are so the CARE principles are just one of several emerging principles of what we might see as analogous to a fair trade label. So in the farm to table analogy, we were thinking about data in our backyard that we own. It's really clearly ours, and there are no ethical conundrums about us going and picking some sage from our backyard or, dealing with our own farm. But now you start thinking, okay, a lot of data, and Jim gave some great examples of these, but a lot of data are extracted. A lot of data were put together in dubious ways. And now these are masked under like several generations of updates, but the original data acquisition was done in a sort of unethical way. And so when we think about why we would, there's sort of some of the data producers are asking us to say, don't use these data unless you're going to do something meaningful with them. Don't use these data unless you're going to help us have more control of our data and help sort of make the world a better place. And so this is something that is harder to write into legal documents. We don't have CARE licensing agreements yet. You have, again, this is the front edge of people having the discussion about data ethics. And they're saying, okay, we have some room to build on this. We have a sort of dark history of data acquisition. How do we do better? How do we make some rules for people on how they can use data? How do we be transparent? One of the things that's come out of these is something called the TK label. This is a really great group called the Native Biodata Consortium, came up with this idea of a metadata tag specifically for indigenous and tribal data. So they can tag data that would normally not be tagged with provenance metadata saying, this is where it came from, this is who owns it, this is what to think about. And then as you move along, as researchers use those data sets, they can be logged in and saying like, okay, this researcher got a grant off of this data set. This research published these things off of it. This was included in this working group. So again, these are bleeding edge ethical issues that people are trying to deal with and come up with. So I don't think you should walk away thinking CARE is the new rule. I think CARE is the first major proposal of how these should happen. And you're seeing a lot of discussions in the background about how CARE should be modified and grow to fit all the needs that it needs to fit. Here is a link. Let me put this in the chat for you real quick. This is our documentation for open science. It's just a static website, so you can go if you want to read up more. And with that, I just want to leave you note that you are what you eat. The thing I wanted to get across here is that this is an ethic that you get to subscribe to your own content, right? You can be whatever type of data scientist you want to be. We are trying to lead in this particular ethical space. We would love your help with that. And so think about what you're eating and where it came from and how old it is and how good it is, and leave you with that. Happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you so much, Ty. That was awesome. And also thank you to all of you. I know that this has been a long first session, but we just wanted to make sure that everyone was more or less on sort of the same ground, and had a good idea of a lot of these foundations upon which we will be building, during the Forest Carving Codefest. And our next two virtual events will be much more interactive. The next one will be focused on getting everyone up and running on the cyber infrastructure. And the second one, you'll be starting to engage with your team a little bit and do some brainstorming. After this event today, later on, you will get an email with some information about making sure that you can log on to Cybers, and that you are ready to go for our next session. So please read through that information and make your Cybers account, try to get up on Cybers and make sure that you don't have any technical difficulties on that side. And we'll sort of work through that next time. And between now and the event, just continue to keep an eye out for additional logistics emails. We'll be giving you more and more information regarding the agenda, meeting locations, times, all those sorts of things. And feel free to contact me with any questions that you might have. Thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. And can't wait to meet you in person.